Let us pray. Almighty God, in whose name we gather and whose love we acknowledge, be with us this afternoon as we listen to your voice in the sounds and signs of friendship and wisdom. Make us ever attentive to your presence, especially in your poor and your prophets, you who live forever and ever. Please be seated. As Chancellor of St. John's University, in the name of the sponsoring Benedictine community, St. John's Abbey, and in the name of the Board of Regents, I herewith call into session this commencement convocation at the conclusion of our 132nd year for the conferring of the academic degrees granted by the university. I request Father Hilary Timish, President of the university, to take charge of these exercises.
Perhaps I could take charge by asking someone to turn on the rest of the lights. Or perhaps there's some symbolism. Maybe they come on when you get the degrees. I'm not sure. Well, welcome to all of you, members of our Board of Regents, parents and relatives of our graduates, other distinguished guests, faculty and staff, most of all, graduates of the class of '89 from the College and the School of Theology. This is your day. By my count, there are 438 of you, and conferring your degrees on you is the reason for this solemn and happy convocation. Commencement, of course, also means leave-taking. As always, parting is, in some sense, sweet sorrow. Sweet because all of us share your sense of accomplishment and take pride in it. Sorrow because we have become accustomed to your faces, your lively presence on campus, your friendship. We will miss you, but we wish you every success. We pray that St. John's will remain in some sense yours, a place and a community which will continue to be a part of your life and will hold a place in your hearts. Before I introduce our speakers, let me say thanks to your parents, your relatives, in some cases your spouses, all those who have supported you in your education at St. John's. Your achievement is also theirs, and we share in their happiness that you have pulled it off successfully with their help. Let me also thank the faculty for laboring with you, guiding your learning, correcting your exams, and taking a deep interest in your welfare. I particularly want to recognize two members who are retiring from the faculty, Dr. Lee Blaskey, Professor of Sociology, and Dr. Steve Warland, the first holder of the Clemens Chair in Economics. Our thanks and our good wishes go with them. I also wish to recognize and thank Dan Finn, Dean of the School of Theology for the past 5 years. His service in this role has been distinguished and greatly appreciated. In the fall, he will return to the faculty as Steve Warland's successor in the Clemens Chair. And finally, my thanks to the members of the administration and staff, from librarians to coaches, to registrars and housekeepers, to Brother William the Knight Abbot. All of them have shared in your education at St. John's. They have affected you by the kind of people they are, as well as the services they perform. It is a pleasure to recognize them all. And now our first speaker, Michael Holscher, speaker for the senior class, is a government major from San Antonio. He will be going to work in Washington. Moving from place to place comes naturally to him. He was born in London and had much of his early schooling in Italy and Germany. Besides maintaining an excellent academic record, he's graduating today cum laude. He has taken an active part in campus life in various ways, various roles: campus ministry, a resident assistant, assistant in the Academic Affairs Office, most notably as editor of the Record in his senior year, where he encouraged factual reporting, lively commentary on the campus scene, and thoughtful coverage of contemporary issues. His parents, Frederick and Shirley, are here today with his older brother Mitchell, who graduated last year, and other members of the family, and I'm sure they will lead you now in welcoming him as speaker for the senior class. Michael Holsham.
If the truth be known, I have always looked this silly in a graduation cap. About 6 weeks ago, when it was announced that my class had elected me to deliver this address, one of my aunts called to congratulate me. And in our conversation, she said, "Mike, we knew the day you arrived at St. John's that you would be delivering that address." A few days later, I was talking to a friend of mine who likewise called to congratulate me, and I told him what my aunt had said just a few days earlier. And he said, "Yes, Mike, but remember, she was talking more about your tendency to speak than about your ability." My friends, here we are, the St. John's class of 1989. 438 of us, dressed as scholars, our minds made weary by the intensity of our academic work over the past 4 years, as well as by what some might call our social work over the past few weeks. And yet today, each of us is somehow refreshed by the wonder of our achievement. We gather here in this church, this place where we have gathered so many times before. This place where we gathered 4 years ago as freshmen to observe for the first time what at the time seemed like a somewhat strange monastic event. We now call it monastic evening prayer. This place where we have gathered every year to begin the academic season with an opening day university mass. This church where at least some of us have sought refuge late on a Tuesday night when we had that research paper or the take-home final exam that the professor just wouldn't allow late. This place where we have gathered all too often in sadness to bid a fond farewell to those friends who left this place and this life sooner than we might have wished. Mark Besser and Patrick Mooney, our own classmates Mark Moeller and Andrew Mortius, and fathers Ivan Havner and Michael Blecker and Otto Weber. Today, however, the sadness that we feel is the sadness that goes with leaving a place we're fond of. But that sadness, great as it is overwhelmed by the incredible joy that accompanies our accomplishment. And so we've asked our family and our friends to be here with us. Not so much because we want them to flatter us with their congratulations, but because we need to thank them for their role in our success. And I don't think there is any doubt that it is fitting that so many members of the faculty and administration are here. For the diplomas which each of us in this class will receive a few minutes from now are not only a telling and formal recognition of our achievement, but of theirs as well. And so we, all of us together, gather in this magnificent building and we celebrate. And each of us, no doubt, has our own reason. We can imagine that somewhere here today there is a student who is celebrating because the 4 years which at one time seemed like they would go on forever, today will end. And we know that somewhere in this building there's a father who is celebrating because the son or daughter he thought would never make it, today has made it. And we know that somewhere in this building there is a mother who is rejoicing because the financial commitment to a private education that she thought she could never meet, today she has met. Yes, on this day we celebrate. And despite the fact that each of us has our own reasons to celebrate, we must not forget that one important reason which we celebrate together. It lies at the root of all the others. For on this occasion, we rejoice in a unique and profound relationship between an institution and an individual. Between this institution we call St. John's and 438 individuals. There should be no doubt that this relationship is worthy of celebration. We need only look at those institutions which, by their nature, oppress individual minds, stifle individual creativity, and warp individual souls. Relationships in which the institution oppresses and the individual perishes. We need only look at those relationships to fully appreciate the one which exists here. Yes, our relationship is different. For like any healthy relationship, it has developed into one which works two ways. One in which both sides challenge the other, thereby encouraging the other to develop more fully. St. John's in the past 4 years has challenged each of us to bring our own sound judgment to the critical and complex issues of our time, to explore the great ideas of history, and to search for our own place in this dynamic world. And we, on the other hand, have challenged St. John's to remain true to what's best in its tradition, while not allowing it to forsake the many opportunities to progress in these changing times. Today, however, we not only celebrate what this relationship has produced, but likewise what it has the potential to produce. Today, we look to the future, knowing that we will each continue to enrich this institution, just as it will continue to enrich us. We know that whenever a member of our class goes forth to continue his studies in an effort to further broaden his scope of the world and his understanding of the world, St. John's will be enriched by that. And when a member of our class goes forth to accept a managerial position in which he strives to open the door of opportunity for everyone, regardless of their color or sex, St. John's will be enriched. And we know that when a member of this class goes forth to establish programs for the homeless and the hungry in an effort to relieve their undeserved pain and anguish, St. John's will be enriched. My friends, there can be no doubt that when any member of our class goes forth to serve the needs of the global community through volunteer work in the Peace Corps or other worthy organizations, St. John's will be enriched. But as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, this relationship works two ways. There are expectations on either side. You can rest assured that whenever St. John's challenges its faculty to maintain a commitment to the liberal arts curriculum, those of us who pass through here will be enriched. And when St. John's strives to continue to promote and maintain a socioeconomic and racial diversity among its students and faculty populations, those of us who pass through here will be enriched. And we will be enriched whenever St. John's resists the wicked temptation to lower its admission standards in an effort to boost its enrollment levels. My friends, that is what this place is about. That is what this relationship is about. That is what today we celebrate together. And so then, what does all of this mean? Well, if everyone would poke the person to the right and wake him up, I'd be glad to tell you. It seems to me, my friends, that all too often we've witnessed college graduates who leave their college or university with their diplomas firmly in hand, and they find a comfortable job in a comfortable city, settle into a comfortable office on which they can hang their diploma comfortably on the wall. And in their desire to achieve this comfort, they fall idle to the world. The broad vision of the world with which they leave college narrows rapidly, and they forget the challenges posed by the great problems of our time. And they claim they cannot afford to help. My friends, it is not a matter of whether we can afford to help. It seems to me rather that it is a matter of whether we can afford not to help. There is entirely too much to do in the world for us to fall idle. There are too many families without homes and too many children without families for us to fall idle. The cure for AIDS is too remote, and the threat of violence is still too near for us to fall idle. The environment is too sick, and the sick are too neglected. There are too many churches that need more leadership, and too many corporations that need less corruption. Ignorance and hatred are too great, while tolerance and understanding are too scarce. And perhaps saddest of all, there are too many around us who simply do not care. And so the critical question then becomes this: why in the world would we spend 4 years bettering our minds if in the end it didn't better our hearts? Why in the world would we spend 4 years enriching our intellect if in the end it didn't enrich our souls? My friends, a St. John's education is not just about learning. It's about applying that which we've learned. It's not just about knowing, but also about doing. Perhaps we here can draw inspiration from the recent uprisings and protests by Chinese students who are demanding greater liberty and freedom in their country. If we could develop only half their courage, if we could only have half their resolve, if we could only find half their inspiration, imagine what we could do. Yes, this day gives rise to a great celebration of a unique and profound relationship between St. John's and 419 of us, its 1989 graduates. As we pause to reflect on the past 4 years and the fruits which this relationship has produced, let us remember what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said nearly 20 years ago when he accepted the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize. He said, "Mankind can only be saved if all men are concerned about everything. If we are worth anything at all, let us try to help." We who are about to graduate have done much in our 4 years here. And today we have every reason to be happy because we know that there is so very much left for us to do.
William F. Buckley is one of those people so well known that introducing him seems redundant. Like millions of other people, we feel that we know him from his syndicated column from National Review, a journal of opinion which he founded in 1955, from Firing Line, a weekly television debate now in its 15th year, from some 30 books of fact and fiction, ranging from political commentary to travel diaries to detective stories. Most recently, he's tried his hand at playwriting for the Louisville Drama Festival. He's generally tagged a conservative, but my impression is that, like each individual angel, he is a category unto himself. A recent commentator has observed that he frequently displays quite unconservative affinities for tempting fate, engaging the new, seeking after the unknown. Joe Ferry, a member of our faculty, has written that his enthusiasm challenges our national instinct to keep politics at the fringes of our collective emotional life. Whatever his stance, it is not recorded that Mr. Buckley has ever been dull. He has visited St. John's twice before to give a lecture in 1967 and to debate Michael Harrington in 1980. We welcome him today for the third time to give the commencement address. Mr. William Buckley.
Father Abbott, Father Hillary, Mr. Holscher, gentlemen of the graduating class, I have concluded, after years of experience, that the only generality one can make with a high degree of confidence about commencement addresses is that no one is likely to remember what you said unless you promulgate a Marshall Plan or disclose that America has suffered from an inordinate fear of communism. Those of us not in a position to launch 1,000 ships from a lectern need to come to terms with the evanescence of our speeches. What all commencement speakers can contribute to the satisfaction of a graduating class is brevity. I remember back when it was my turn as a graduating senior at college, the fantasy of the endless commencement address, the voice that continues without end, intoning the great themes that identify the obsessions, the worries, the vexations of mankind, omitting only the encephalophonic voice of the unstoppable commencement speaker, who will be talking about wars and population control and conservation when there are only ashes out there, or perhaps angels and maybe 2 louse warts. But I have working for me here at St. John's this, and perhaps only this, namely, that what I say is unhappily not entirely conventional, so that the voice you hear in your fantasy would not be my own. Indeed, from time to time, when I am invited to speak at commencements, some students, obviously mistaught, object to the invitations having been extended in the first place. on the grounds that conservatives are generally disreputable, afflicted with birthmarks political liberals born without sin are blessedly free of. I remember in 1969 being informed by an anonymous student at the University of Syracuse that a group of fellow students intended to protest my appearance right in the middle of my speech. That was just after the invasion of Cambodia, which took place about the time you were born, so that when I began my address, I told the assembly that after reading the news, I was apprehensive about my chances of concluding the ceremony without interruption, because that morning's edition of the New York Times had reported that at Brown University, to receive an honorary degree the day before, Henry Kissinger had only just begun his speech when 1/3 of the senior class stood up, turning their backs on him while he spoke. That report, I confess to the audience, discouraged me in what it foretold about my own public appearance as a commencement speaker, given that Henry Kissinger was associated only with the invasion of Cambodia, while I had been publicly advocating the invasion of North Vietnam. It all reminded me of the little boy seated in the front row on the first day of kindergarten class who was asked by his teacher, occupied in composing the first roll call, what his name was. Stinky, he replied. Provoked, the teacher wrote out a note, handed it to the little boy, and told him to go home to his mother. He picked up his books disconsolately and trudged out toward the door at the end of the classroom. He was almost out of the room when he suddenly stopped and, leaning over to a classmate, whispered, "Come on, shit-face, you don't stand a chance." So then, to slip into the hortatory mode, what would this conservative commencement speaker like to see the graduating class of St. John's University as you leave here, almost 1.5 centuries after the great war that divided our country so irreversibly, it seemed? We need, I think, not dwell on the obvious, which is why I shall nevertheless state the obvious. You may remember that they call this rhetorical technique paralepsis, as in I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. But I can say it briefly, namely that the postgraduate pursuit of knowledge is itself pleasurable in addition to being useful. But having acquired the knowledge you have already acquired, what then will you do with it? Beyond what Mr. Holscher has so wisely and eloquently advocated that you do with it. I would be very pleased if in your pursuit of happiness you happened on it. It is very unlikely that you will do so. One does not discover happiness in the same way that Columbus discovered America. Can any advice be helpful along the way? Only, I think, advice that suggests, on the one hand, reduced expectations, on the other hand, more exalted expectations. To expect romances with your country, your profession, your family even, to be uninterrupted by doubts, temptations to disloyalty and disappointment is surrealistic. That is why unhappiness intensifies when its uninterrupted opposite is anticipated. On the other hand, there are other perspectives. The modern tendency is to think only of the secular world, to think of one's lifetime merely as a wayward narrative, the journey of a single atomistic creature who is nothing more than a concatenation of chemical substances, a stochastic biological phenomenon whose flight on Earth is no more meaningful than the flight of the sparrow, a reflection in which you were fortunate enough to be guided here at St. John's by your faculty, brings many of us to discern more in life a grander design than animates any earthly curriculum, in which what one does matters not merely to yourself and to your family and fellow citizens, but also to the Maker of us all, whose will be done, Whitwell's august findings will be revealed to my generation soon, to yours much later, but no less inevitably, a rendezvous with the sublime, at which time our conduct on earth will be supremely relevant. Having pursued personal happiness, what is it that might engage those idealistic faculties that have been aroused by your reading and by our intensifying knowledge that we live in a single world in which we are intimately involved with one another? 20 years ago, on many campuses, there was feverish political activity, most of it designed to disparage the venture we were then engaged in Vietnam. I was much struck during those years by the glide pattern of our retreat from the Wilsonianism reaffirmed by John F. Kennedy in his celebrated inaugural address. A commitment to lend all our strength to the spread of freedom abroad. We've come a long way. We may today be heading, given the special euphoria flowing from events in the Soviet Union and in China, toward a geophysical, cultural, and even moral isolationism. Our retreat from Southeast Asia was much more than a military retreat. If it had been only that, one could with some equanimity have simply concluded that our commitments had outreached our strengths. But what happened, no doubt in part prompted by consciences hungry for self-justification, was that in order to feel better about our retreat from Wilsonianism in the imperial sense, we nurtured the idea that we had no reliable criteria by which to proclaim the objective superiority of the culture of freedom. No grounds, presumably, for judging the work of Aquinas, Thomas Jefferson, and Woodrow Wilson more elevated than that of Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh, so that when the Marines came back from the wars, it was to a miasma of American self-doubt, which has by no means dissipated. It is one thing to be isolationist in the sense that Switzerland is isolationist, yet utterly confident of its own well-lodged claims to being a civilized society. It is something else to be isolationist on the grounds that we have no title to say with confidence that we are advanced in basic ways over cultures that are, yes, less civilized. People shrink at such sounds, dismissing them as chauvinist. But the opposite of chauvinism in this case isn't humility, it is nescience. If we cannot hold up the Bill of Rights over against the Communist Manifesto and declare the one a benchmark of civilization, the other of atavism, then learning is really of little use, and you may forget everything you got here at St. John's that is of extra utilitarian character. In Vietnam, coming up on the 15th anniversary of the victory over South Vietnam, life goes on and is described by Janetta Sagan of Amnesty International. As a young girl, Miss Sagan was a prisoner of the Nazis. In her early 50s, she became a heated opponent of American participation in the Vietnam War. As an elderly scholar, she has become now a chronicler, aghast at what has happened in the Vietnam whose independence from the West she urged. Her summary was compressed in one paragraph that appeared recently in the Wall Street Journal. The situation in Vietnam today, she writes, includes the familiar signposts of communist repression. Religious worship is persecuted and churches have become warehouses. Private shops have mostly been confiscated, with ethnic Chinese shopkeepers the favorite victims. Several 100,000 Vietnamese have spent time in the re-education camps, and as many as 80,000 people remain. The lucky prisoners dig latrines or plant crops, the unlucky clear minefields. Prisoners eat a few vegetables and a bowl of rice or two per day. Anyone who rebels against this regime is quickly punished. Prisoners' arms and legs are bound into contorted positions before they are tossed into metal boxes to bake in the tropical sun. One former prisoner was thrown into an abandoned water well for 5 days because he sang Silent Night on Christmas Eve. The re-educated are dispatched to new economic zones, which are hard-scrabble areas where growing even enough food to survive is difficult. Huang Hui-Quin, a former Communist Party member, now in France, said today, if Hanoi allowed the people freely to leave the country, even the lampposts would apply. I take this moment, however anxious to avoid the ponderous, to gesture from this small, scholarly, consecrated university in mid-America to those who suffer, including those so likely to suffer beginning tomorrow in China, to tell them that there are such as Miss Sagan who see them, who know that they are there, and who cry out loud to express fraternal grief, and to record my own conviction that if there is such a thing as a corporate national challenge to American idealism, can it accept a nobler one than to stand fast against the juggernaut of which Vietnam is only a specimen victim, and which is not deflected by a kiss of peace given in Moscow, or even by the gallant Chinese who have recently made history, so that, resisting the lures of pacifism and a blasé, ungrateful humility, your heirs and theirs, living in freedom, can 50 commencements from now say that, though perhaps impotent to prevent the suffering of others, you became gradually aware of it and understood the meaning of one world in a very different way from those apostles who saw it as a call to diminishing the existence of national frontiers. The American people, John Quincy Adams said, are friends of liberty everywhere, but custodians only of their own. That you are friends of liberty should always be made clear. Graduate of St. John's University, friend of liberty. And a third and final injunction, injunctions being the business of commencement speakers, we need, I think, to cultivate the faculty for gratitude. When I was 13 years old, I was chaperoned here and there along with two sisters of about the same age along the greater environs of London. My music teacher, whom I loved and still do, was by my side. When I went to the counter of a little souvenir shop in Stratford-upon-Avon and paid out 3 or 4 shillings for Shakespearean sundries I had picked out, an elderly lady took my money, returned me some change, and then suddenly, extemporaneously, withdrew from the display case a tiny 1 square inch edition of Romeo and Juliet, and smiling gave it to me, a gift. I took the 6pence she had just before given me in change and deposited it in her hand, a reciprocal gift. Once outside, I received a kind but resonant rebuke from my teacher. I had done an offensive thing, she informed me. A gift is a gift, she said. I must learn. She went on to accept gifts. They are profaned by any attempt at automatic reciprocity. Many years later, I read in a biography of Abraham Lincoln about an episode that had briefly convulsed the receiving line at the White House. A lady in that line, after taking the president's hand in formal greeting, suddenly thrust forward with the left hand a huge bundle of long-stemmed roses, depositing them, in effect, all over Mr. Lincoln. The president and the receiving line were immobilized. Abraham Lincoln smiled and said, after the briefest pause, "Are these really for me?" "Yes," his guest replied, beaming. "In that case," the president said, "I can think of nothing that would give me more pleasure than to present them to you." The flowers were returned. There were smiles all around. The lady took back her roses, and the line moved on. That is an unusual, perhaps a singular exception to my teacher's injunction against the social sin of reciprocal gifts. Few people in public life or private have managed such extemporaneous grace. Many years went by, and then last February, I received on my trusty electronic MCI a message tapped out from a friend, a computer expert. He said that the retrieval system I had been looking for one which would permit me to locate book titles in my library via my computer, had been completed. He had worked on the problem in the interstices of his busy schedule for over a month. "It is yours," his message typed out, "as a belated Christmas present." I flashed back on my computer screen that I insisted he send me a bill for professional services. One moment later, my mind traveled back, and I was again a little boy at a souvenir store at Stratford, embarrassing a kindly woman who had essayed an act of generosity there, and then I shed the grown-up equivalent of tears at my awkwardness. But as I reflect on it, there is a distinction. The gift automatically repaid in roughly equivalent tender is corrupted. It ceases to be a gift, and the philanthropic impulse is traduced. The unrequited gift, in Burke's phrase, is one of the unbought graces of life. Any effort to repay vulgarizes the offering, and one risks repaying a kindness with an act of aggression. But a country, a civilization, that gives us such gifts as we dispose of cannot be repaid in kind. There is no way in which we can give to the United States a present of a Bill of Rights in exchange for its having given us a Bill of Rights. Our offense, the near universal offense, remarked by Ortega as the fingerprint of the masses in revolt, is that of the Westerner, rich or poor, learned or ignorant, who accepts without any thought of any debt incurred the patrimony we all enjoy, those of us who live in the free world. The benumbing thought that we owe nothing to Plato and Aristotle, nothing to the prophets who wrote the Bible, nothing to the generations who fought for freedoms activated in the Bill of Rights. We are, some of us, basket cases of ingratitude. We cannot hope to repay in kind what Socrates gave us, but to live lives without any sense of obligation to those who made possible lives as tolerable as our own, as Mr. Holscher has so eloquently told you, within the frame of the human predicament God imposed on us. A lack of gratitude to our parents who suffered to raise us, to our teachers who labored to teach us, to the scientists who prolong the lives of our children or parents when disease strikes them down, is spiritually atrophying. To fail to experience gratitude when walking through the corridors of the Metropolitan Museum, when listening to the music of Bach and Beethoven, indeed when perusing your own Hill monastic manuscript library, when exercising our freedoms to speak or to give or to withhold our assent, is more than to profane spontaneous generosity. There is no way that you can fully repay what you have received here at St. John's after 4 years, but you can feel that sense of obligation to St. John's as to your country. One worries about our failure fully to express, however clumsily, to feel, however coarsely, our gratitude for the fruits of genius, for generosity human and divine, for the great well springs of human concern that gave us Shakespeare, Abraham Lincoln, Mark Twain, our parents, our teachers, our friends, and yes, the old lady in Stratford. We need a rebirth of gratitude for those who have cared for us, living and mostly dead. The high moments of our way of life are their gifts to us. You must remember them in your thoughts and prayers and in your deeds. No doubt I have overexposed myself in giving instructions and handing down judgments. I remember about 10 years ago, serving as commencement speaker at Gettysburg College. The student speaker who preceded me arrived at the lectern with 2 differently pitched saxophones strapped around his neck. He spoke about the complicated interrelationships between truth, justice, peace, duty, and love. Each time he completed one of his dozen formulations, he would put 1 or 2 of the saxophones to his lips, striking a single note which he understood to be the musical equivalent of the harmonious interrelationship he had verbally constructed. His exegesis lasted 42 minutes. That evening, short on cosmic material, I wrote a newspaper column describing the tortured afternoon. 3 days later, I received an indignant letter from the president of the student body advising me that, in his opinion, my own address had been no great shakes. Allowing me to make the obvious reply, namely that I was hardly surprised to hear him say this, since, after all, Gettysburg owed its reputation substantially to its historical underestimation of great orations. And so, having enjoined you to monitor even my own expressions, I have nothing left to say, save to wish you from this moment on, alumni of St. John's, Godspeed, and to hope that you will always think with pride of your university, of the faculty and brothers that labored with you, and of the parents who made it all possible, even as I shall think always with pride and gratitude that you have permitted me to share with you this happy and important hour.
Now I believe the graduating members of the men's chorus, as the senior ensemble, will sing Gaudeamus Igitur under the direction of Dr. Axel Timer in his arrangement of that traditional student song.
Gaudeamus igitur, juven estum sumus. Gaudeamus igitur, juven estum sumus. Post secundam juventutem, post molestam senectutem, nos habebitumus. Nos habebitumus. Ubi sunt qui ante nos in mundo fuere, ubi sunt qui ante nos in mundo fuere, valite ad superos, transite ad imperos, ubiam fuere, ubiam fuere. Vita nostra brevis est, brevi professores. Vita nostra brevis est, brevi finietur. Venit mos velociter, rapid nos atrociter, nemine pacetur. Nemine pacetur.
We will begin the conferral of degrees now by presenting honorary degrees to Mr. Buckley and Mr. J.F. Powers. I'll ask Sister Eva Hooker to read the citations.
William F. Buckley, Jr., defender of the faith of conservatives and traveler of the globe. On land or sea, your bearings have never been in doubt since you took the side of God at Yale. The free play of thought is your game, debate your field of play. For 3.5 decades, you have defended without compromise an ideological blueprint for America. You have held to your faith in our collective ability to debate and deliberate, and have illustrated once again that in a democracy, the voice of dissent can become the voice of the majority. A man of avocations, you have made a career of your pastimes, founding National Review, addressing countless audiences in speeches, and through your syndicated column, composing books of travel and intrigue, adapting television to the sustenance of public discourse on firing line, all with a languorous ease and wit which belie your arduous commitment to the commonweal. A Christian and a gentleman in Cardinal Newman's famous definition, you have taught us that passionately expressed beliefs are not incompatible with civility nor heated argument, with personal respect and courtesy. A timely reminder after the campaign of 1988. We salute you for vindicating the classical liberal arts of grammar, rhetoric, and logic in their modern guise, literacy, eloquence, and argument, and confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa. James Farrell Powers, master of the writer's art. Your stories show us as we are, against the obscure background of what we are called to be. Few writers of your power have found a finer irony in the economy of salvation. You refrain from explanation and trust your readers to discern the presence of grace in the daily interplay of mixed motives and half-forgotten aspirations. You catch us unawares by the mystery of things. You make us laugh despite ourselves and betray your own complicity in the human predicament by condemning no one. Your characters play out a divine comedy this side of paradise. In your spare style, no word is wasted, and every commonplace of our speech becomes an absolute. The novelist Mary Gordon has written of you, he is expert in the hidden, in all that the ordinary eye has missed, his irony, his mercy, his firm-rootedness, his perfect ear and steady moral gaze rank him among the great comedians who lay their hands on us and then leave us saner for their ministering touch. Your books have received high critical acclaim. Mort Durbin, your first novel, received the National Book Award. Your second novel, Wheat That Springeth Green, was among the finalists for this high distinction. We salute you as our mentor, our colleague, and our friend. And in token of your eminence among the authors of this day, confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa.
Sister Eva, I believe you have the next lines.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts please rise? Father Hillary, I present the candidates for the degree of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts who have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Bachelor of Arts Egregia is conferred upon Patrick John Morris. The degree Bachelor of Arts Summa Cum Laude is conferred upon Roger Arnold Erzman, Kevin James Mongrain, Mark James Borboom. The degree Bachelor of Science Summa Cum Laude is conferred upon Paul Thomas Klebeck, William Scott Becker, Randy Douglas Meckles, Michael James Nemenich. The degree Bachelor of Arts Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon Richard William Westall. The degree Bachelor of Science Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon Brian Keith Schmidt, Stephen Richard Sabers. The degree Bachelor of Arts Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon Stephen John Quam. The degree Bachelor of Science Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon Daniel Joseph Becker. The degree Bachelor of Arts Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon Terrence Thomas Schwegel, Daniel John Kramer. The degree Bachelor of Science Magna Cum Laude is conferred upon John Robert Gerlach. The degree Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science, magna cum laude, is conferred upon Scott Michael Bodegheimer, Greg Owen Crow, Jeffrey Thomas Fink, Chi Kung Jonathan Jung. The degree Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude, is conferred upon Thomas Michael Peliquin, David Nicholas Dene. The degree Bachelor of Science, magna cum laude, is conferred upon Joseph James Bolke. The degree Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude, is conferred upon Stephen John Hoffman. The degree Bachelor of Science, cum laude, is conferred upon David Charles Sullivan. The degree Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, is conferred upon Mark Joseph Schwob, William Bryant Huner. The degree Bachelor of Science, cum laude, is conferred upon Patrick Christian Bodine. The degree Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, is conferred upon James Peter Mueller, Christopher Michael Rusted. The degree Bachelor of Science, cum laude, is conferred upon Stephen Scott Andrews. The degree Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, is conferred upon Joseph Patrick Rogers. The degree Bachelor of Science, cum laude, is conferred upon Michael John Hoffman. The degree Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, is conferred upon David Charles Howard, Stephen Russell Bennett. The degree Bachelor of Science, cum laude, is conferred upon Stephen John Gertner. The degree Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, is conferred upon Michael Allen Holscher, Brian Brost. The degree Bachelor of Science is conferred upon Mark Anton Mahold, Stephen Robert Andrews, Robert Joseph Fote, Jeffrey Allen Smith, Peter Drevlo Seltz, Lance James Swanke, Ronald Leo Skirbeck, L. John Krautkramer, Patrick Gerard Conley, David Thomas Kapsner, Reich Christian Anderson, Christopher John McGowan, John William Donner, Richard Paul Whitman, James Felix Albright, Alan Phi Hunt, Dominic Floyd Manella, Eric John Larson, Stephen Robert Prowse, Michael Stephen Goff, Jeffrey Michael Balistreri, Michael John Cronin, David Paul Schulte, Jimmy J. Gagliardi, Christopher Peter Koenigs, Stephen John Newharth, Keith Leon Dingman, Gregory Joseph Turin, Jeffrey Stephen Lewis, Bradley Thomas O'Brien, Paul Stephen Lundquist, Michael Eric Cashel, David Patrick Ruel, David Eugene Sinner, Paul Michael Harold, Simon Richard Schwob, Stephen John Ebinger, Scott Frank Stoltenberg, Brent Lee Doring, James Bernard Just, Christopher Eric Gettler, James Michael McIntyre, Timothy John Lincoln, Michael John Eisen, Keith William Leppert, Scott David Zaski, Trace Allen Christensen, Thomas Norbert Spanner, Sean Patrick McDermott, Robert J. Tickle, Joel Michael Budd, Mark Jerome Tennis, Scott Joseph Mitchell, Richard Allen Fashing, Peter Douglas Johnson, Jeffrey Scott Dieters, Jeffrey Thomas Gaynor, John Michael Stevens, Mark Richard Young, Christopher Sean Raymond, Peter Michael Farrell, Thomas Ray Horman, Jeffrey Thomas Similla, John David Putsky, Christopher Hugh McLaughlin, Jeffrey Francis Tupy, James Gerard Tupy, David Scott Heisler, Paul Matthew Kruth, Stephen Michael Klein, Donald Robert Rolando, Daniel Thomas Farniak, Stephen Leroy Redding, John Edward Hughes, David John Kenny, Robert Michael Wesley, David Shu Chung Thung, Henry Van San Tran, Joseph Anthony Pouliot, Todd Charles Herrings, Tim John Rosinski, John Stephen Lottie, Christopher Anthony Lorsing, J. Eric Schlorf, Michael Patrick Koser, Michael James Moyna, Michael Dugan Dorsey, Brian John Blachek, Charles Edward Easley, Ayub Mohammed Mudzir, H. Robert Glavas III, Christopher Mark Dranovic, William Allen Steigoff Jr., Jason Gary Lindquist, Mark Christopher Kraus, Douglas Donald Ebner, John Andrew Heinen, Todd Klebert Bridgman, Brad Allen Ellingson, Brian Thomas Sullivan, Michael Anthony Swenson, Joseph Brian Kreckelberg, Trent John Graham, Kyle Allen Loven, Timothy Robert Liebens, Jeffrey Scott Anderson, Daniel Andrew Hennon, Patrick Michael Hall, Eric Thomas Linder, David Joseph Lutz, Eric Waldo Randall, Robert Louis O'Connor, Joseph Anthony Henry, Peter Michael Strobel, Thomas Philip Wilson, John Allen Kuski, John Nelson Tuvey, Patrick John Maurer, Brian William Kippers, Patrick Henry Arman, Stephen Gerard Holm, Douglas Edward Neeser, Etienne Zamit Lupi, Michael Dean Hintz, Andrew Dwayne Forbes, Hubert Humphrey McKenzie, Raymond Alexander Neely, Eric Ronald Christensen, Scott L. Zipp, Joseph Arthur Sousa, Brian Robert Fannenstein, Paul Gregory Hughes, William Francis Lynch, Jr., Michael Reagan Hahn, Stephen Joseph Schering, Christopher William Hennessy, Michael Harry Pellicci, Gregory Daniel Kologe, Stephen John Gohl, Thomas Richard Gaybeck, Jr., Gregory James Molnar, Samuel James Cotrera, Michael Raymond Cummings, Eric Andrew Haverkamp, Brendan Patrick Reardon, Daniel Robert Miskin, Stephen Kent Holmgren, David Richard Bach, Thomas Dale Doroff, Michael Robert Borowiak, Nathan John Luther, Joseph John Majeski, Michael John Davis, Leroy John Wolbeck, Jr., Christopher Style Olson, Michael John McNerney, Mark Joseph Dockery, Jeffrey Edward Klein, Jeffrey Thomas Batkowitz, Paul Kenneth Olberding, Jeffrey Thomas Jewidik, Gregory Jude Christopher Evans, Alan Richard Brousseau, Michael Anthony Walls, George Arthur Holland, William James Sifferly, Sean Jerome Janisek, Eric David Hallstrom, Blair Benedict Allen, John David Sipe Jr., Stephen Charles Krebsbach, Paul Lauren Heidecker, Brian Seamus Rogers, Alan Andrew Beal, John Mitchell Dobmeyer, Eric Randall Aurelius, Michael Douglas Doherty, Daniel Neil Grant, Mark Patrick Moeller, Michael Raymond Reese, Benjamin Charles Coster, Glenn Frederick Rose, Jeffrey Paul Capel, Joseph Richard Tingley, Peter James Vanderberg, Michael John Klein, James John Anderson, Christopher Martin Lind, Richard Jason Holtz, Dennis Hanlon Dusick, Todd Anton Anderson, Gregory Allen Johnson, Joe Arnold Zuger, Stephen John Trudel, Michael James DuPont, Richard Joseph Creighton, Thomas Robert Lundstrom, Timothy Bernard McConville, Timothy John Trobeck, Todd John Thielen, Timothy Terrence Hogan, Randy Arthur Lowenberg, Brian John Crane Olson, Bradley Thomas Christian, J. Cornelius Cronin, Stephen Joseph Lewandowski, Christopher Thomas Parrington, Christopher Arvid Hassel, Philip Anthony Mendoza, Brian Jero Thielen, Brian Chester Brown, Craig Matthew Arnold, Carl Otto Schlegel, Thomas David Reeser, Joel Walter Beach, Michael Thomas Schmidt, Richard John Holland. The degree Bachelor of Arts is conferred upon Timothy James Teskey, Martin James O'Brien, Mark Thomas Vandehei, Douglas William Yeager, Leonard Allard Sarvella III, Eric James Kittleson, Timothy O'Hara Murtha, Kevin Raymond Blonigan, Michael John Brote, Joseph William Langfeld, Kenneth John Kolarski, Thomas Edward Morris, Mark Henry Schaefer, Christopher Emil Breivik, Douglas Todd Asmussen, Christopher Allen Grove, Scott Christopher Carlson, John Michael Gimple, James Matthew Kahn, Timothy Neil Fulford, Scott Anthony Kopp, Aaron Lee Van Morlem, Mark Joseph Bielik, Morris Nathaniel Ellis, Stephen Philip Simonet, John Cassidy Kenny, John Joseph Boyd, Mark Joseph Peller, Mark Charles Drexler, Andrew Harold Tewell, Paul David Sullivan, Mark Thomas Hooley, Gary Henry Zufer Jr., David Joseph Charpentier, Bob Theodore Sullivan, John Christopher Schmalzer, William Thomas Leitonen, Thomas Matthew Berry, Christopher Mark Manning, Jeffrey Louis Lensmeyer, Douglas Jeremiah Shea, Peter Michael Richards, David Richard Paul Houston, Kirk Edward Hilbreck, Michael Patrick Kane, Daniel McKim Hutz, Daniel Richard Vogel, John Michael Meyer Jr., Marcus Gerard Hagenmiller, David John Waters, Troy Mitchell Zimmerman, Jeffrey Allen Maxwell, Mark Allen Wachnick, Mark Anton Lindquist, John Matthew Hoffman, Harry James Kaiser Jr., Anthony Ray Vigil, Lawrence Robert Freyer, Brian Patrick Wolhopter, Stephen David Martin, Kevin Richard Daly, Thomas Lavelle, Kevin James Heitz, Michael Thomas Fletcher, Todd Anthony Meeker, Paul John Gibbons, David Philip Rodemacher, Christopher Andrew Murphy, Christopher Daniel Temke, Peter William Amble, Eric John Aulis, Peter Gregory Truax, Mark John Dominic Herbert, Michael Alexander Aragon, Gregory Arthur Skoog, David Wayne Larson, Theodore John Copy, John Matthew Doyle, Robert Anthony Randall III, Max Melek Grunbaum, Daniel Joseph Thompson, Brian Leonard Williams, Michael Augustin Tracy, Daniel John McGarry, Robert Alois Dewey, Thomas Richard Voller, Jason Peter Kuderna, Thomas Aloysius Zierton Jr., Brooks Randolph Peterson, George Kevin Kozbowski, Timothy Francis Guinea, Neil John Blanchett, Robert Douglas Lawton Jr., Gregory John Firk, Joseph Fredericks Halloran, Robert James Adams, Thomas Lee Cook, Christopher John Zawiski, Eric Chamberlain Rivers, Thomas William Wolkerstorfer, Henry Lawrence Reichert, Pravakar Bikram Rana, James William Burke, Kevin Curtis Dumville, Michael Peter Seifert, Randy James Ruprecht, Joseph C. Eck, Kenneth William Klein, Sean Patrick Barris, Michael Thomas Murray, John William Benson, Kenneth Stephen Turk.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, and Master of Theological Studies please rise? Father Hilary, I present the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, and Master of Theological Studies which have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, Master of Theological Studies, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the School of Theology will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Master of Arts in Theology is conferred upon Nancy Bauer of the Order of St. Benedict. John Boating Mensah. Luke Mancuso of the Order of St. Benedict. Adele Sotner of the Order of St. Benedict. Patricia Weiser. Terrence Williams Keogh, Oblates of Mary Immaculate. The degree Master of Divinity is conferred upon Kevin Fusi. Michael Clarer. David Ostrowski of the Order of St. Benedict. The degree of Master of Theological Studies is conferred upon Teresa Croca Ansbury. Thaddeus Mosqueda. And Lucille Schaefer, Order of St. Benedict.
And now let us lift our hearts and voices by singing the final hymn, From All That Dwell Below the Skies.
Let us pray. Lord our God, we praise you for your glory and thank you for your goodness to us. Look on these graduates with your love and bless them as they leave this school to move forward in life. May your Spirit give them many talents and skills and help them to use them for your glory and for the good of all people. Loving Father, we ask this grace through Christ our Lord.